Welcome to our first interview, the esteemed Derrick Bergman from the Netherlands. This guy is one of my online friends, and today's the first day we're talking in person. We've known him from Twitter and X, and he's always got some great insight on the Dutch scene and the Dutch smoke, and I'm always curious what he has to say, and I'm sure he's a wealth of information about all things cannabis in Holland, past, present, and future. And yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on, and as the first guest, especially, Derek. I think that's super cool.
It's an honor to be here, especially as the first guest.
I appreciate your patience with our technical issues, trying to figure it out because we're new to this, but you've got more experience in podcasting by a long shot.
Yep, I do with the High Tea podcast, but the technical stuff, I'm terrible. I have a terrible techno paranoia. I do not own a mobile phone. I do not have a driving license. I'm really
Wow.
this is all not working for me. I like to keep it down to basics. Pretty
Well,
much.
that's really nice, and that's pretty refreshing in today's age, you know. I think a lot of us dream of not having that mobile phone someday.
I never bought one. Right from the start, I thought it was a bad idea to have a phone in your pocket at all times, and also have a device that any police or justice department can follow you around wherever you go. So I
That's right.
never, I did not have to get off it because I never got on it. So I do
Yeah,
have like
wise man.
a tablet that I use for like mail and stuff, and Twitter, but not the phone. No.
That's really cool. You're a special man. Yeah. You know, and I've, caught an inkling of that over the years for sure, that you're cut from a different cloth than most. So I was curious, when was the first time you remember using cannabis?
I distinctly remember it. Even the street name, because I couldn't believe it. It's like almost in a story. It was at a party of when I was in high school of some older students and a really cool set, I could say. So I was happy to be invited to this party, and the street name in Dutch is Paradijslaan, so Paradise Lane. And at some point during this party, a group of people gathered around, and they did not use like a bong or a joint or nothing like that, not even a chillum. They had a sort of Aladdin's wonder lamp where they did have a chillum. They put in the chillum, and then they made like this makeshift device, put hash in the chillum, and everybody could suck on the thing and get high. And this was actually my first experience. It was great. I sometimes still pass that house, and it all comes back. I remember it.
That's amazing. I bet you it was Moroccan hash. Do
That
you remember?
I do not remember. I just remember
There's so much in Holland back then.
so many people say that the first time off, a lot of people do not get stoned at all. That is the second time before you sort of your system adjusts. But in my case and to my memory, I got stoned the first time. No problem.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So did you feel like an instant attachment, like this is going to be my friend for a while now, or
Not
you
that
just,
much. Not
no?
that much. I must say, and this is quite typical in retrospect. In my high school, there was like a big alcohol culture. This has changed now, but when I was in high school in say the late 80s, you were even allowed even the the first classes. So these were pupils like 13 years old. They were allowed to buy beer at the school party, for instance. This was all normal. I used to be in the team that made like the high school paper, and when we got together, to make this thing or to have a meeting, we always have beer there. And we were not any older than 15, 16 at that time. So during my high school time, I got drunk a lot. Like ever since I started smoking weed, like on a daily basis, I never get drunk. Why would I want to get drunk? I'd much rather be high. But so to me, like the first few years, it was something that was quite special, because this is how old I am. Back then, I didn't know any coffee shop in Eindhoven. There must have been like one or maybe two, but this was all a mystery to me. It's like a very different scene. How do you even get it? I remember asking my one of my friends in high school because I know he knew where to get hash, and sort of pester him saying, "Where do you get it, man? I also want to buy." And he was not saying it. He didn't want to say it. And then after a while, he did say it. And then this is another thing I will never forget. So yeah, imagine two of us, young boys, being on the bike after high school, going to this secret address. So we drive into the city center of Eindhoven. We come into the street. I'm thinking, oh, this is special. The street where my grandparents used to live. They had died already then. And wouldn't you believe it? He parked his bike right in front of the old house of my grandparents, and this was the house dealer place, you know. So I
Oh,
was stepping into my grandparents' house and buying my first hash in there before I even knew that there was a coffee shop in Eindhoven.
it's an omen. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it's how long ago was this?
Ooh, this must have been like 86, maybe
Okay,
86, maybe
okay.
87. And then
Yeah, I think go ahead.
like after high school, I went studying journalism in Utrecht, in the center here of the Netherlands. And I had just one of the professors had just taught his class that if you are a journalist, the news it's on the street, literally. If you look around, you will find news stories. But he also named as an example a very small article in a newspaper on page 24. If you are susceptible to it, can lead to a fantastic big article if you just look out right. So I had just learned this, and then I saw in the newspaper an ad, very small one, page 22, that says we want freelance journalists and photographers who have, I don't know if it's an English word, who have affinity with smoking weed. And I had never seen that in a job ad. What is this? You got to have affinity with smoking weed.
That's
And
dream job.
so then I thought I have to react, to this little ad because maybe I get the job would be cool. Well, I'm still studying, but I want to find out what's the story behind this. What kind of a job is this? And this is how I actually ended up with the High Life magazine, which is by now the oldest European magazine still running about cannabis culture. And then
Sure.
and then I think from that moment on, that one of my first jobs was back then in the magazine. They had this item that they called the coffee shop test. So for every issue, somebody would go to like 8 coffee shops or 10 coffee shops and just rate them like a Michelin guide. And this was one of my first things to do. And yeah, this was a blast. Of course, I traveled
Yeah.
all over the country because I always coming myself from like the south, from more the province, not Amsterdam, not the big cities. I thought it was really important for the readers of the magazine to not only have the stories about the coffee shop in Amsterdam or maybe Rotterdam, but also in Zwolle and Utrecht and where the fuck, around the country. And so I took this as a principle, and it got me to yeah. I never saw so much of my own country as back in those days when I was the Michelin coffee shop tester.
Man, oh man, that's super cool. That is so fun. I like it. The the first I remember going to Sahara Sands in Utrecht
Hmm.
that boy owned before he had High Life at the time, but I don't think he'd started Royal Queen Seeds, right?
No, he did.
So
A while he did only the magazine and the like
yeah, that's when I met him. He had the magazine and the fair. I was at the
yeah.
fair in Utrecht. It was in the
Wow.
summertime or spring, and it was nice weather. It was when I was living in Switzerland. I remember it was. I was there showing off one of those wheels with the hydroponic wheel where it all grows inside the
Ah,
tube and turns around.
wow.
So I'd set one of those up that I was doing wholesale of those units from BC into Europe via the Swiss partners, you know. So the Swiss partners were like, "Hey, let's go set this thing up in Holland and blow their minds." So we went
Uh-huh.
and set up this rotating thing, and I remember Boy coming by, and he knew my partners. He said, "Oh, you come by our coffee shop afterwards, Sahara Sands." So it was a neat place where you went down the stairs to the canal, and then it was just off a little ledge right on the canal.
Yep.
A very private, tucked away spot. It looked like it was a real cave, basically. It was pretty cool. I really liked that spot. It was a neat spot. I mean, the hash was nothing to write home about, but it was still,
Hmm. Actually,
it was a cool
the
scene,
very
I think.
first coffee shop ever in the Netherlands was not in Amsterdam, but in Utrecht, and on the same canal. Also in
Okay.
this tunnel kind half round space that you also remember is also where the very first one. They started in 1968. But I do have this little argument with Bernard Bruining, the guy who founded Mellow Yellow Coffee Shop and Positronic Grow Shop, and
Right, right.
this guy, the Potfather, because he always said he knew this Utrecht coffee shop as well. But he said, you cannot really call it a coffee shop because what we started with Mellow Yellow is actually making the portions before the sale. Because before that, with a dealer, he explained to me, it was all if you knew the dealer, you get a bit more, you know. And he didn't like this. He wanted to everybody to have like a normal, accessible
Wait.
kind of thing that you always get the 1 gram. And this is why he
Yeah.
prepackaged the baggies. And he said with Sarrazani, the one in Utrecht, he says, nah, indeed they did have a dealer behind the bar or at the bar, but he doesn't consider it a coffee shop. So he thinks the very first coffee shop ever was his coffee shop, Mellow Yellow. But I tend to disagree because to me, as a consumer, it's like, okay, if I can go to a place, a bar or a coffee shop, and I know every time that I can buy there and smoke there, that's a coffee shop to me, you know?
That's it. No, that's totally fair.
Yep.
Totally fair. Yeah. So he can lay claim to being the first to have evenly weighed stuff
Yep.
prepackaged, but
Yep.
that's still not the first place you could buy it and smoke it, So
Yeah. And
that's
then even if
interesting.
you
Yeah.
would go even further back, but this is and then it's the question: can you call that a coffee shop? But in Amsterdam, there's still it still exists a cafe on the New Market. It's called Cotton Club, and I know from people long passed away that this even in the 50s, in the late 50s, if you would ever find any weed in Amsterdam, you would find it at the Cotton Club, because so many people from Suriname and people working on the big ships, they would go to this one place because they were the first one to play like modern jazz, and there you could buy some weed if you were lucky, because the guy who told me this, he remembered it very well. Is so okay. Only black people basically are in there. So if you come in as a white dude, it's awkward from the start back in the day, and it was nothing like go up to the bar and ask the guy if you could buy some weed. It's really like, no, sit at the bar, buy a few drinks, maybe let a hint out, and then if you are very lucky at the end of the night, you might be able to purchase something. So that's like a proto coffee shop. But I love all these kind of to me this makes up the culture. I love all these
Yeah.
stories and the origin stories. Who started it? Who were the first
Yeah.
ones? All this is
Well, that's
really.
right. There's a black market, which you just described, really.
Yep.
And then, so you can have that to sit down and there's a menu in front of you. That's
Yep.
two different, that's
Absolutely.
another evolution of it, right? I remember the very first time I went to a coffee shop in Amsterdam, first time I was there, it was a Hard Rock just off Leidseplein
Hmm.
in the late 80s. And it was I remember saying to the guy, like, "Oh, this must be really hard to get a job. Everybody must want to do what you do, cutting up the hash and weighing the weed and selling it." And he said, "Oh no, it's super easy. Nobody wants this job. You just need to be able to speak English and one other language, and you get it. That's it." He's
Yep.
like, "It's the easiest job to get here." And so I remember looking at their list. Of course, it was all in guilders still, and I remember what I picked out. I picked out the Jamaican, but everything was imported except skunk.
Yeah.
They had skunk was the one weed, and it was very hairy, immature. Like to our eyes today,
Of course.
everybody would be like, "What did you pick that at like
Yeah.
4 weeks?" It didn't look anywhere close to being ready. But on the other hand, it did smell and looked like something. It was just so different. Like it was fresh, but it was the only Dutch product on the list, and
Yep.
everything else was imported hash or imported flower. So there was West African flower, Thai flower, Jamaican flower, and I think that the Jamaican was the second most expensive one next
Mm.
to the skunk. So I thought it's probably the best of the imports.
Yep.
And that skunk just looked sus. I didn't know what to think of it. And I was like 18 and on a super tight budget.
Yep.
So I remember I just made a beeline for that place. Once I got checked into my hostel, I'm like, okay, I got to get some weed. I didn't eat for 2 days before that just to have more money to buy weed when I got to Amsterdam.
Yep.
So I went in and got that, and I remember feeling pretty lifted walking back to the hostel and like, this is nice, walking along the canal totally by myself on that first sesh. And then back at the hostel, I wasn't smoking it in there. We were playing pool. They had like a little bar and pool table there, and I would step out in the street and smoke one. A couple of the guys are like, "Oh, you found some weed?" I'm like, "Dude, it's easy to find. You just gotta go find a shop." So, anyway, so there were some other Canadian guys that were like pretty stoked that I was sharing some. And then when we came in, the bartender's like, "Oh, they do raid the hostel looking for drugs sometimes, and you can't really think that it's legal. It's
Yep.
just toleratable." I was like, "Well, I'm not going to stress it over 3 grams of weed, man. Like,
Mm.
just chill."
No, but
But I've been back to Holland so many times, and I'm always fascinated by the history and the progress because for the longest time, Holland really was leading the way in permissibility, let's say.
true.
So,
And then we got taken over because our politicians didn't finish the job.
uh, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's
Yeah, but it's
often
like we had a lot of steps back. But what to me was very nice to witness is that okay, so our policy this year is 50 years that we have the tolerance policy. They changed the policy in 1976. This was the pivotal moment when they made the distinction between cannabis and hard drugs. And the guy who made the policy, who was then Minister of Justice, later went on to become Prime Minister twice, Mr. Dries van Acht. And I got to know him a bit because he's known like the father of the tolerance policy in the 70s. And he died quite recently. But we had him on at our festival, Cannabis Liberation Day, on stage. So that was a wonderful thing. And I had a few discussions and a few talks with him. And he said that he was really he felt quite bad because he did, of course, in 76 make this policy where it's like decriminalized to to sell and to own a small amount of cannabis, but not any kind of production or import. And he says this is something that I should have done, but also all the ministers of justice who came after me in the 80s, in the 90s, in the zeros, they should have taken that next step to also have the production there. Because obviously, when they started in 76, it was all hash. There was not any, or any to speak of, any local production of wheat like there's now. So that they at that moment didn't really understand, what was going to happen. I can understand that. But to have him admit that the failure was with the politics, not with the growers or with the coffee shops or with the consumers.
right.
That whole monster that was created to have like the legal shops, so to speak, or tolerated shops, but totally illegal production is what yeah, a lot of problems came from that, you know?
Yeah. Well, there wouldn't be any problem if it wasn't for the government. You know, as, as soon as they start regulating it, it's all over, you know.
Yep.
But they, you know, I think you can't do better than to leave it alone sometimes, you know. That's, you know, my feelings, but as you probably caught on to by now.
Yep.
But nowadays, that, you know, I've seen you posting from, I think there was 10 licensed companies
Yep.
to start as part of the experiment, and you've been reviewing those as they come out.
Yep.
And
And
I'm
also,
curious. Go ahead.
visiting the facilities. Because I do it
Right.
for Isle of Man,
Yeah.
and I have this series that I go to all of them. And this is a lot of fun, I must say. And even the first one, it was almost emotional for me to actually be in a Dutch legal facility, because I traveled to Canada in 2018 and visited a few facilities then, which was great, you know. But I remember also coming back then and thinking, how the hell is it possible that in Canada they can do it and we are still nowhere, you know? But then yeah, in 2025, I think was my first visit, or maybe end of 24. But anyway, to be in there and to see it with my own eyes, because these are quite big facilities that these licensed producers have now in the experiment. Also really brings home that how on earth are they going to roll this back? You know, the politicians still sort of pretend to say, yeah, it's an experiment. We can also go back to just illegal like it always was. But then if you visited these facilities and you see that there are 150 people working there, etc., no way they are going to
No,
roll it
no.
back, you know?
You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
That's what I think.
That's,
And imagine a politician having to defend to a journalist or to a voter, yeah, you know, we have these legal companies that have all these legal jobs and that pay taxes, but you know, we'd rather go back to the mafia. It's
yeah, right.
how can you defend that? You know. So to me, for the longer run, I'm optimistic about that. I must say.
Good, good. So I think you visited all 10 of them by now?
No, no, not yet. Five.
Okay.
Yeah, they have one.
But you've smoked all 10 of them, I'm assuming.
Yeah, maybe the one that came online just now, the last one.
Oh, okay. You
I
missed the
didn't,
last one.
but a lot of them, and that's
You
a lot of fun. But since I'm a home grower, of course, I always like better to smoke my own weed, you know, because the
I
prices
feel
are
that.
good, but still, even to pay for weed and even for seeds, rather not.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
No, you get a bit jaded when you've been growing your own for a while, and even paying anything for weed just seems like really, like, why? You know, I've got so much at home, you know.
yep,
And you trade with your friends that are home growers, you know, like, or you not even trade, but just gift each other some.
oh
You
yeah,
know what I mean? Like, so we just, you know, when you're a grower, you have abundance around weed, and people that don't grow, they think of weed in dollars a gram, whereas after you're growing for yourself for a while, you don't weigh it, you don't even
true,
care how many grams it
true,
is, it's irrelevant, it's just a stalk of herb, you know.
yep,
And so I really get a kick out of it, that it's no problem to just take a handful of weed and put it in a bag or a jar and give it to a friend that's used to going and paying $10 a gram for it. And they're like, "Oh my God, that's so generous." And it's like, I can't finish it before it goes stale
uh-huh.
sometimes, you know? So yeah, it's great to be able to share. Homegrown is really
Absolutely.
about abundance.
And
And I
by
really
now,
think,
my children, I have three sons. They're all adults, and especially the older one, he smokes quite a bit. So you know, when we have like Christmas here or with his birthday, I always give him some homegrown. And my sister, who moved back to my parents' house, she's also a smoker. I can give her my homegrown. Like you say, it's a fantastic thing to do, because of course, I imagine it's exactly the same with you. You put so much love and effort and attention into these plants. You know, you're always looking to improve. With me growing outdoor, it's a lot of I like the work, you know. It's I don't complain about it, but if you would add up all the work, because I also like put them in my shed, you know, to force the flowering half of July, otherwise you can't really finish in the Netherlands. Yeah, so I'm every day I'm out with getting these plants, putting them there, putting them in the sun, moving them again, going up to my balcony, the trimming, take it really seriously. And but that's great, and it's also it's a pride thing as well. If you can give some real good weed that is cured right, and give it to somebody, and they can see that the effect especially is better than from what they get at the coffee shop. That's really nice.
Amen. Amen. It's a labor of love, especially doing the light depth when on a small scale when you're
Yeah.
lifting the pots in and out. Like it almost takes just as much time to pull tarps over a big greenhouse as it does to carry
Yep.
5 plants back and forth every day. So I just laugh at it. It's a labor of love, and I totally get it. I like doing some light depth in the summer too, because in Canada, where I am, I'm at 50 degrees north. So for what really finishes straight outside, you're pretty limited. But
Yep.
if you can force them to flower, or I do something I call cheater outdoor because I have a covered back porch facing south. So I can pull the pots under there. They still get sun because the sun's low in the sky in the fall, but they don't get rained on.
Yep.
So that's why I call it cheater outdoor, because they're still outdoors. They just got a roof over the top so they don't get rained on. So it extends it. But, the light's getting weaker at the end of the season, and,
Absolutely.
you're not getting the best you could grow in a better climate or even indoors at that point. But with light depth, I can grow just as good as indoors outside,
To me, it
with
was
light
like a
depth.
total revelation. I, of course, knew the
Yeah.
concept for years, but I'm a bit of a lazy grower too. Although, as the years progress, I put more effort into it. But when I started doing, I couldn't believe I'd made this myself. The end result, also with the genetics I use, but especially like you say, that you have the power of the sun during the critical phase when it's really flowering.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you really, yeah, you get a real nice end product.
Yeah, that's nice. I appreciate the value proposition of that too, the growing the best with the least that you can,
Yep.
So if you can throw everything at it, and some people, that's really what they want. When I was younger, it was more, I had more of a competitive bent about growing, whereas now I just don't really mind too much for the backyard fun stuff. Like I have commercial endeavors, which I have to try a little harder at, but the backyard stuff I really like to just play with, and even just to make up the soil mix from stuff in the backyard.
Mm.
Like I fill the pots with sticks or hemp stalks from previous plants. So I might start out with 80% chopped up hemp stalks
Wow.
in the pot, and then I top that up with compost that I make from my kitchen and backyard stuff, and they'll top it up if because there's often still lots of gaps and holes, so maybe I'll pour in a little bit of potting soil mix at the end,
Hmm.
you know, just to fill in the cracks. But then I've got some of those pots running 5 years now, where I just do a little top dressing of compost in the spring, maybe halfway through the summer to give them a little extra greenery, but you'll want the green to fade by the end a bit more anyway. But there's so much in there that's stuff that breaks down slowly,
Hmm.
like langbonite or a lot of these minerals, they might be available in that pot over 20 years. They're not
Yeah.
available all at once, but they break down and break down. So, there's you can get lazy about it eventually. I feel like I don't like lugging soil around. I don't want to have to mix up pots every year. If I can recycle those pots with
Yep.
living soil and I don't have to remix the pots, I love it. But they really are just add water at that point.
Hmm.
So I might make some teas for joy just because I have like big piles of mint and stuff growing around the house. So I'll put a bunch of mint in a bucket and let it the water turns green, and then I water it with that,
Uh-huh.
and just making some easy teas. But I've literally tried not to add anything purchased in the last while. When I
Okay.
first mixed the pots, there was dolomite lime and bone meal
Mm.
and some guanos and stuff. So I did have some purchased stuff in there, but on the ongoing basis, I haven't added any purchased
Wow.
fertilizers. So it's mainly my kitchen compost with
Mm.
the coffee and eggshells and avocado and banana peels and all that. And it's just really super rich and chock full of worms. And it just topping those existing pots up with a bit of that just seems to be enough. And, I'm a hash smoker too. Like I like flour. I mean, I love flour, and especially if it's really done well for flour. But if it's got resin, visible resin, you can make hash out of it, and I really don't mind being this far north and growing something really awesome, even if it doesn't totally finish, because the hash is still going to
Oh
be
yeah.
sexy,
Yeah.
you know? So I'd rather have, I don't want to have early stuff that gets finished but still doesn't get me high. I'd rather have something that I'm reaching for the stars and maybe I don't quite get there, but I
Uh-huh.
still get, to the moon.
Yep.
So,
And the hash,
so yeah,
you dab it,
I'm,
the hash.
well, I for the longest time rolled hash and tobacco, and I've really pretty much cut that out, except for a special occasion now and then. Like I won't say I'd never do it again because I do really enjoy the hash and
Oh
tobacco,
yeah.
and it's a different buzz. Like I never was into rolling grass with tobacco, but I grew up smoking hash and tobacco.
Mm.
Actually, I didn't grow up, but the point is, it's better for you not to
Of
because
course.
cannabis is a bronchial dilator and it pulls the tobacco further into your lungs than it goes by itself. So it does more damage when you do it
Mm.
together than if you had one after the other, wouldn't be quite as bad. But if you mix them together, it does more damage apparently. So the flavor of hash and tobacco to me, it's just kind of like having a cappuccino and biscotti.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
could have either one on their own, but having them together is a lot nicer. So I can make an exception. I'm not hard against doing it
Mm-hmm.
ever, but as a daily thing, it's not the way. And I still like smoking a little hash in a pipe, like just a little pure hit of hash in the
Mm.
pipe. I enjoy that. And usually I'll sift it to the point it's pretty melty anyway. But if you get it super melty, you can't even really smoke it on a screen. So what I'll
Yep.
do is I just leave ash in the pipe. So when I put in that melty, I've got a bed of ash there and I'll put it in there and then it just melts into the ash and becomes a big orange cherry. And you get one big, beautiful, flavorful hit of whatever hash you load in there. So
Mm-hmm.
I like to sift out, my plants and I just generally keep a few jars of flowers from the tops and then say 90% of the plant or 80% of the plant, I'll just put that into hash.
Yep.
And then sometimes I will press the hash for rosin and I'll dab the rosin. So I do like dabbing rosin, but I still like smoking hash as hash.
Mm-hmm.
And one of these days, I'll have a friend come by that smokes cigarettes, and I'll be like, "Dude, break one out because I want to roll a nice hash spliff." And I
To
just
me,
dig it.
that's like
Like,
since I quit tobacco about 5 years ago, I never did it because actually my co-host on the podcast, Rens, he was the one that gave me the final push to quit tobacco because he quit then too. But he also works in the industry and he goes to Spain a lot. And everybody in Spain they smoke just the tobacco hash joints with really 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 good hash. So for that did it for him, you know. After like a half a year, he was in Barcelona the third time or the second time, and then he had some and started going back. So he would still roll his weed pure, but he smokes a lot of tobacco because he smoke a lot of hash. So to me, that's the thing.
right,
I'm not going there anymore. And that's why also I ask you
smart,
because I smoke a lot less hash, you know, because it's more complicated. What I sometimes do is like use my weed that hasn't turned out that great, and then use that, you know, as a burning device and put the hash on top of that in a joint. But it's still not ideal. And also your point about the flavor and the effect being different. I totally agree on that with you because like one of my friends also he would like to go without a tobacco and smoke pure, but he says I tried it so many times, but if I do not have my joint with tobacco and hash before I go to sleep, I don't fall asleep. You know, I just cannot sleep.
Mm.
And if I do have the tobacco and the hash, I do not even have to smoke half the joint, and I'm
Isn't that
sleeping.
funny?
Yeah. So
I've I love hash in weed too. Like
ooh,
it's great to, and sometimes like I like kind of what I'll call like a neutral herb that is
yeah,
maybe even like amnesia haze or something like that, where it's just kind of a, I don't want to say plain Jane, but you know, a little bit kind of new, almost neutral. So I think it's not a heavy tarry smoke. It's a fairly light. Any of the narrow leaf stuff, usually they're very light textured smoke. They're not as tarry as the heavier Afghanica types. And so if I make some nice hash, I like to roll it with grass, you know.
yeah,
So I pretty much always, especially with herb that I'm growing outside at 50 degrees north, it can always use a little extra kick, you know.
yeah. That's
It
also
doesn't
true.
hurt at all. So if you take 80% of the plant and turn that into hash, the other 20% you kept as buds suddenly gets a good lift, you know,
Yep,
because you're rolling it with the hash back into it. So you're raising the game that way, you know?
yep.
So that's one strategy. But I know things changed over the years as far as the permissibility of homegrown
Oh
in
yeah.
Netherlands. So what can you tell us about that?
The fundamental problem is the same as like with everything in the Netherlands with weed. I like to tell people there's only one thing legal, except for medical, but that is to use cannabis if you are 18 years or old. All the rest is still all formally illegal. Any amount to possess, any amount to buy at a coffee shop, it's all technically illegal, but it is tolerated in these amounts. So that used to mean for the plants, if you had no more than 5 plants, then you would not get prosecuted for it by the Justice Department, but the police will always take your plants. That's the thing. You do not have a right to grow. If they see them, they can take them, which to me makes no sense whatsoever, but this was always there. But up until I would say around 2000, hardly any police guy would do it. You know, they'd have better things to do. They don't mind. But from the turn of the millennium, then we got this whole repressive conservative wave with very right wing governments, and then they started. Still not. They still fundamentally have the same system, but they made all kinds of. The law is actually they call it Damocles, like the sword of Damocles, that's always hanging above your head. And this is what they do is like this law makes it possible for the mayor to close down your house if you're growing weed. And this is so this means that you are evicted from your house for like 3 months. And this it means if you are in social housing renting, they'll just give the house to somebody else, and you are homeless basically. So this they started to do, and they can do it. The mayor can even do it with any amount of plants. Then there was this hype for a while, and now it's all in the contracts. In all the rent contracts that you can sign, if you rent an apartment or a house in the Netherlands, it says there is no growing of weed allowed whatsoever. You will be evicted from your house. You sign for it. Most people don't even know. A lot of those people think 5 plants is okay. No, 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 no. In the 80s, maybe, or in the 90s, not now. We had one guy, because I also with the VOC NGO for legalization, we try also to help people. And a lot of people come to us with all kinds of problems around the cannabis laws. This one guy, he knew that the rules were so strict, so he grew his plant, one plant, outdoors, guerrilla style, in the woods. He harvests the plant, he put it up in his little house to dry. Next day, there's the police officers there. He's evicted from his house for one fucking plant. He's still living at a
That's
campsite. And this is the Netherlands, you know? And it's just so many people have no clue about this. But the rules are for the Damocles one, that's also the plants, but even the grams. It's not just the plants, also the gram. Any amount over 5 grams, which is the maximum you can buy at one purchase in a coffee shop, anything above that is now considered dealing quantity. So technically, if you and your wife would go to the coffee shop, each buy 3 grams, which is perfectly tolerated, you have 6 grams together, be enough reason to be evicted from your house in the Netherlands.
that's madness.
So what happened is that this is one of the reasons actually why we started with this NGO, because we could see it's all going downhill, you know, more repression and we're going backwards. And you can see by now, we started in 2009. At the high point of the repression, there were around 5,000 to 6,000 growers were busted by the police every year, for a small country. Yeah, these are like thousands and thousands of police operations with 4 to 5 cops per raid, all the paperwork. It totally makes no sense. But by now, this number is gone down, gone down, gone down. But of course, there is no right for you. If you are a grower and you do not own your house, then you run a real big risk of getting evicted from your house. So I know a lot of people, and it really breaks my heart. One guy, I'll never forget it. He he had lived in India for 15 years, and then he came back to his country, the Netherlands, in Rotterdam. Everything had changed. Then we had the whole repressive wave, and he talked to his friends saying, "I had 2 plants on my balcony, and I was evicted from my house." So this poor guy, he knows how to grow wheat very well. He has a good eye for quality. He does not dare to even have 2 plants on his balcony, so he's pretty much forced to go to the coffee shop to buy really bad quality wheat for a really high price because he does not want to run the risk of losing his house. Normal, but that's why we really fight with VOC and try to get it into the head of these politicians. That's my idea. It's great to have shops, you know, to have coffee shops or dispensaries or whatever where you can buy your weed if you do not grow it. But before that, you should have the right to grow it yourself, and then maybe after come the commercial sides, you know.
I
And this we
agree,
don't
but
have.
that's the first order of business is homegrown.
Yeah,
That's it. Nothing. Nobody else should be allowed to grow if you can't grow your own. You know, it's like saying you can only eat in restaurants, but you can't cook at home.
yeah, exactly. Imagine that.
Right?
Imagine
Yeah,
that.
that's exactly what it is. You
Yeah.
know, so that's you don't have control over how much butter they're putting in your food in the restaurant,
Yep.
let alone how much fungicide they're putting on your weeds. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
so I would really rather be able to grow my own before buy it, and
Yeah.
it's nice to have the option for buying it. Lots of people don't have a green
Of
thumb,
course. Yeah.
but it's fundamental you should be able to grow your own before
I once
anybody
read
can commercialize it.
a text of a normal ad, American from the 70s, and they explained, and I thought, that's really brilliant. Is that apart from all the other advantages and good points about growing your own, they explained that it would always be like a safety valve for either if it's made, produced commercially by pharmaceutical companies or by just commercial companies like coffee shops, whatever. If they know that people can start growing their own once their quality, their price is too high and the quality is too low, they're not going to go away with it. You know, it's
Yeah,
and that to me is also a very important point that you keep them sort of in check, because you know if you go too far with it, then people, you know, if tomatoes would be 15 euros or 20 euros a kilo and the quality would be super bad, more people would grow the tomatoes in their garden, you know. And this to me is also, yeah, is also a reason why home grow is so important. But if you look at the experiments, for instance, you go to the law, it says nothing about home grow. And even, and I have the the impression that a lot of politicians don't know this. The weed that you can buy in the experiment coffee shops from the licensed producers, you still do not have the right to own it. The police guy can still frisk you and take that so-called legal weed off you because you do not have a right to possess. And by now, since April last year, 2024, our German neighbors, the biggest economy in Europe, the one country that has a maximum influence on everything in the Netherlands for commercial things, they are allowed to grow 3 plants. They have the right to have that. They can carry 25 grams on the street. The police officer cannot take the 25 grams. They can have, that's not too much, of course, but they're working on it, 50 grams at home. So for the 3 plants, it really makes no sense. How bad a grower do you have to be to get 50 grams of 3 plants,
Well, that's it. You're automatically going to be over, unless you're growing like 3 plants in solo cups, maybe.
Yeah,
But
yeah. But
but
even then,
basically, you're going to be over 50 grams once you light up a closet.
and then
You
it's
know,
even in the law that you are not, I know a lot of German activists, they are working on it. You are not allowed to share your homegrown with your friends. What the hell? What are you supposed to
it's
do? Chuck it?
you can make your own beer probably and make your own wine.
Absolutely. Same in the
Yeah,
Netherlands. This
yeah,
we use
yeah.
as an example. If people ask like, how do you envisage a good policy? It's that. It's
Yeah.
the beer policy, and
Yeah,
I
and
checked it
even
for.
that's too much. Even that's overkill for what it is. Because herb, it's hard to compare herb and alcohol. Like I can enjoy both of them, but the toxicity of
That's true,
alcohol
of
is
course.
so much worse and is known to be a cause of cancer, whereas cannabis isn't carcinogenic like
Yeah,
alcohol. Not even close, right? Not even
this is
close.
true. But the fundamental point that, and I checked this for a recent publication. There is no limit on the amount of beer that you are allowed to make at home, if only you do not sell it.
Yeah.
In
So
the
you can
Netherlands,
share it,
you
right?
can share it, you can drink it all you want,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the moment you start selling it, then other rules kick in. To
Yeah.
me, for that would be great for cannabis.
That's good
There-
enough. Yeah,
There's no
that's good
limit
enough.
unless you
I
sell.
think it, yeah. That would be a huge improvement. That would
Totally.
be a
Yeah.
huge improvement.
Because this
I
I wonder
know,
about Canada. The plant limits there are pretty strict. So do people just don't care about that, or do they have like very big outdoor plants, or how does this work in practice?
well, there's lots of people, so they all do their own thing, but
Mm.
we're allowed in most provinces. See, it's federal, but provinces can overrule it and tweak it how they want. So certain provinces don't even allow the federally allowed 4 plants a household. So if you have like a medical license to grow for yourself, you might be allowed to have 99 plants. So there's lots of people that do that. I've never possessed a license in Canada, and I've always felt like, you know, in other countries, I'm a guest. I'm there by voluntarily and I need to play along. But in Canada, I'm sort of like, well, I didn't sign up for your rules.
Yeah.
So I don't feel quite beholden to them because I never agreed to them. So
Uh-huh.
here it's 4 plants. I won't just grow 4 plants. I'll grow a few more just to mess with them. But I mean, I'm not doing them commercially. And here they found a lot of new ways to charge people. They created a whole new pile of cannabis crimes. I think there was like 6 before legalization and 36 after. So I think up to 4 plants in BC, you're good as long as the neighbors don't see them and complain. If the neighbors can see them and complain, the cops can come around and tell you to take them down. So that alone sucks. And then I believe is 12 plants and up that they have, 4 to 12 plants, or maybe 4 to 11. I'm not exactly sure, but then it's a $1,500 fine, so
Mm.
$1,500 fine to have 5 to 12 plants. And then over 12 plants, it's the fine plus 6 months in jail.
Wow.
So, I mean, you weren't getting jail time for 12 plants in British Columbia before legalization,
Wow,
and
yeah.
now they added like mandatory minimums if you had like 15
Really?
plants now. Like so I don't mind risking a fine,
Yeah.
but I don't want to get 6 months mandatory
Wow.
for having 15 plants. So people, of course, the outdoor ones particularly, but even indoors, a lot of them will try and grow biggest for plants
Yeah.
they can.
Yeah.
For me, it's kind of more about having an assortment of flavors.
Of course.
So I
Me
would
too.
rather have 40 little plants
Yeah.
than 4 huge ones, just because I'd rather try out all these different flavors and have the variation.
Yep.
So some people are thinking, maybe they'll be lobbying towards getting a surface area, like a canopy area instead of, but that could be even worse. They might say, okay, now you can do 4 by 4 foot closet instead of grow 4 monsters in your
Yep.
backyard that you can make at least 4 nice jars of rosin from. So
I know that
I don't,
back in the day, Werner, who we mentioned, the Mellow Yellow coffee shop guy, he also was in politics, tried to get into politics, and he had this plan that everybody should have 1 square meter of growing allowed indoor. And then to me, when he came out with this plan, I sort of course, understand what he was doing, lobbying, etc., and not going too far, not rocking the boat too much, that people take him seriously. But really, just 1 square meter, it's not
yeah.
much.
No, that's a pain. I mean, it's better than none. It's
That's
still
it, of
better
course.
than none. So
Yeah.
if you're sitting somewhere, you're in China right now or Saudi Arabia, and you can't even have a joint, it's like, okay, well, square meter of grass would be great
Yep.
because
Yeah,
any
we
is
shouldn't
better
forget
than
it, of
none.
course. That
And you
so
can
many
get,
countries are behind. Yeah.
and also, is it 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional, because you could have a square meter, but 3 closet or 3 shelves or something, and then you've got 3 square meters. So you got to see, like, is it a canopy surface or the actual
I think
land it takes up?
what he meant was that just a working, so that you could go high up, indeed. But
Yeah. So
it's all just,
that's,
you all just want to make the point that we should have some sort of thing for this. And back when he came out with this plan, not so many people were evicted from their houses. It still was going to get worse. But I
so
remember one time that a mayor told me, talking about the weed experiment and legalization, and I couldn't believe my ears. He said, well, Derek, if it's legalized, then you don't need to grow it yourself. We can just ban all weed growing. What the fuck?
you don't get it, do they? They don't
Yeah,
get
that's
it.
it. But
Yeah, I mean, tomatoes from your backyard, those are your favorite tomatoes of the
of
year,
course,
you know? The
to me,
tomatoes you
it's all
get
a
in the,
it's like a very fundamental thing. That's also, I think, why this, as a journalist, to me, still remains an interesting subject. This is very fundamental and has to do with the relationship between a government and a normal citizen in a country. What is the government for? You know, what? Why are they on earth? What gives them the right to stop you from harming yourself? And in the case of cannabis, you do not even harm yourself. But the principal thing that, if you, as long as you do not harm any other people with your actions, to me, it's why should the government, you know, forbid you
no, it's
to?
such overreach that
Yeah,
that they
they can
care
advise
what
you.
herbs are in our garden. It's like, come on, get serious. That's none of your business. That's beyond your remit.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
really none of their business what herbs are in your garden. If you've got enough government that they can worry about the herbs in your garden, you got too much government,
Yeah, true,
you know?
true.
That's it. Yeah, I couldn't believe it even when I was like 18, 19 and I was starting to grow and we were putting a guerrilla plants out here and there and really trying to be careful not to get caught because one plant would get you in real trouble. And they had no sense of humor about it whatsoever. And they have helicopters and planes out there
Yeah,
spotting it through August and September. And if you're going out to check your stuff and later in the season, you really had to, like, I can remember running into trees, being chased by helicopters and saying, I got to lose them in the forest, you know? And it was just freaky shit, you
Yeah.
know, that you think if they can afford to fly, like when you think of how many cornfields are in southern Ontario, I mean, that's nothing but agricultural land. And people were hiding weed all through the agricultural land, but then also just in the borders or at creeks and anywheres. There's not a lot of wild spaces down there, but there are some forests edging onto this place or that place. And it was really a cat and mouse game, you know, where you didn't want to get caught with the herbs. So
Uh-huh.
you had to, you know, be a little bit covert about it. But it
Yep.
was really like at the time too, I remember reading that for the spotter planes, that I think it was $400 an hour was their operational costs, and they were literally flying over huge amounts of land, like and with spotter planes and guys in it. The one guy I remember reading in the paper, this
What a
cop was
job.
called Eagle Eye
Uh-huh.
because he had a good eye for spotting a glint, the glint of the
Green.
resin in the
Yeah.
cornfields. He was like, he would have his binoculars up in the plane and he was able to find more weed in cornfields than all the other guys. So they called him Eagle Eye, and they had this cop was in the newspaper as like the number one cannabis spotter. And I'm thinking, $400 an hour for each of these planes, and they're covering like vast amounts
Yep.
of area in these, you know, small planes at a low level. And you're just thinking, how much money do they have to waste on this? And there's still going to be weed everywhere in the fall. They're never going to
That's the
get,
thing, of
they're
course.
going to get some of the biggest places maybe, but they're not going to get all the little ones. So you just be careful not to put out, for me at least, because I was just growing for myself, but like
Uh-huh.
1 to 3 plants on every outing. And I wouldn't put all three beside each other. They might be like on one hike where I'd stop
Mhm.
every 10, 15 minutes and plant another one. And then I had a little trap line to check when I come back later, or if there was a drought in the midsummer and it didn't rain for 2 or 3 weeks, you know, I'd have to go out there with some water bottles and a little backpack and
Uh-huh.
go hit them up. I'd just fill them up from like a local creek on the way. I'd always plant not too far from a creek, so I knew I could find water. And
I
but the
can imagine
first
that
day we would,
that smoke would be very good, you know, if it all works
yeah,
out and by the end of the season you can smoke it, it gives something
yeah.
extra.
Oh, believe me, man, that's still to this day. Not every plant I grew with all the different genetics I'd tried over time, but a few of the ones that I remember growing back then, as good or better than anything I've had since, you know,
That's wonderful.
because there's really a good, that 42 degrees north in southwestern Ontario. And that's 42 degrees north is on the west coast. That's the borderline between Northern California, Southern Oregon.
Mm.
So you're at a good latitude
Yep.
for a lot of modern hybrids, let's say. So the first things that I had that were super strong was Northern Lights. I was told it was Northern Lights number 2. Wasn't from Holland, but it was from the West Coast.
Mhm.
And so that was pretty early on. But then later I'd have some other things, and I didn't even know what they were half the time. But people would save some seed from a holiday and say, "Here, try
Uh-huh.
this. It was great smoke. I smoked it when I was wherever in Barbados or Hawaii or California or wherever they went." And it's like, "Oh, that one's nicer. That one's okay." You know, some of them
Uh-huh.
weren't so great, but some of them were exceptional. And yeah, if I could have a jar of that same bud again today, I would be thrilled. Like, I would be thrilled. I would even pay a lot of money for it because
Yep.
those are just a caliber of weed that you don't see every day and you can't
Mhm.
find it in the shop. You know, never
Yeah.
has never been in a shop. You know, that kind of pot doesn't get sold. You
No.
know, it's just pure head stash when people pull that out. They're never going to sell you any.
Uh-huh.
If they're growing it to sell, they just generally speaking, they don't have, I don't know, there's something it's just not there. Once it's commercial, there's something lacking already, I find. You
No,
know?
what's interesting about that is that I would say that, like I explained, around 2000 things got really bad in the Netherlands for the policy and everything. But before, so many coffee shops, they were the people that grew for the coffee shops were people like they would grow 1.5 kilo and then give a kilo to the coffee shop, sell it, but then smoke the half kilo themselves.
Yeah.
And I've known some of these growers, and the beauty, of course, of that system is if you are smoking it yourself, you're not gonna screw it up, because you don't
You're
want to
gonna
smoke
do
that
you're
shit
gonna do the
yourself.
best you can for sure.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
and this and to me this that always stood out in my mind that the first government, we call it the purple government, because Christian parties in the Netherlands, the history of Dutch politics, the Christian party, they are always there. We have a few of them, and this was the first time ever, I think, that there was a government in the Netherlands with no Christian party whatsoever in the coalition government. So this helped for a lot of these moral issues like euthanasia, but also on the cannabis policy, it looked real good because it's always the Christians that try to stop everything. And so the
the
minister of,
Christians, you
yeah,
know.
so the minister of justice in this first purple government without the Christians in there, she gave, when she just was in office, an interview and said, we estimate that there are about 35,000 small growers that sell their weed to the coffee shops. So why not? We will try to do this. Give these people that are growing now already, give them a license and make it legal for what they are doing now. And when I read that in the paper, I was thinking, what? They make sense,
Yeah, that's not bad. That
Now,
works.
later it turned out that the moment after she gave the interview, like the higher up civil servants in the ministry, they make her know very clearly, we're not gonna do that. But I always remember it because imagine if they would have gone through with this, because it was only after that the repression increased so much that we got, motor gangs, real bad people getting into the weed growing business or the weed selling business and really fucking it up for everybody. And so yeah, just imagine history could have gone different, because there's a similar story to this where also in the 90s, there were a few high level meetings, really high level, with the government and Henk de Vries, the founder of Bulldog Coffee Shops. And this sort of working group, they put it together because they thought, yeah, you cannot have this policy forever where it's not allowed to produce it, So we need to have some sort of regulation of backdoor. But on the very last moment, they pulled the rug from under it because there was so much heat coming from France. France played a big part in making things worse in the Netherlands. They threatened us in the 90s, calling us a narco state, and even threatening not to sign the Schengen Agreement, which is like that the borders are gone basically. So yeah, this kind of now with Trump, you're not impressed by this kind of power politics, but back then it was really, come on, you cannot be
Yeah,
serious,
right.
because of the coffee shops. You are not going to have this whole border project that we've been working on 50 years. But so then the age was raised as a response to the pressure from France from 16 to 18. When I was 16, I could legally go into the coffee shop. Now, not anymore. And the amount, you always used to be able to buy 30 grams in a coffee shop at once. And this, I like to tell this story because it's such a good example of how bad policy works. We now have the word drug tourism or coffee shop tourism, which is about, especially, of course, Germans, Belgians, and French people, our bordering countries, coming to the Netherlands only basically to go to the coffee shop, buy weed, and go back again. But this word and this whole problem did not exist before they lowered the amount from 30 to 5 grams. Because you can imagine, if you are a French guy, you drive 150 kilometers to a coffee shop in the Netherlands, and you can only buy 5 grams where you were always allowed to buy 30. You're going to go to 4, 5,
6
maybe
shops.
6
Yeah.
different shops to get your amount,
Yeah. So
So
crazy.
this, it makes clear how our policy can make things worse, because before that, people were not driving all around the city because they just go to one coffee shop.
Right. Yeah. I remember in the 90s standing, I was just about to go into a coffee shop and I'm trying to remember, I think it was Dutch Flowers, maybe. It was
Hmm.
on the corner by a canal. I think it was, I
Yeah,
can't
on
remember
Singel,
100% the name, but I think it's what it
Dutch
was.
flowers. Yeah.
And and when I walked, I was just about by the door and the manager was yelling at these young guys and throwing them out, and they were kind of like, and I was like, and he was going, yeah, we don't need you bloody tourists here, and and he was yelling at them, and I said, so you open or not? And he says, not to these French guys, because the French guys, they come and buy and take it back and they get us in trouble. So we won't sell to these French kids for
Wow.
sure. But you're welcome. You're Canadian. Come on in. And they didn't care. So I was like, okay. And I was a little, didn't know if I should go in or not because they're just like throwing these two dudes out. And they
Wow.
were French guys and they were going around every shop probably and buying a bunch to take back. And,
And
and,
why
uh,
not? You know.
they can't have their packaged, Dutch flower brand hash showing up in French kids'
Uh-huh.
police stops, right? So they don't. So yeah. Anyway, he was not serving French guys, but I went to judge for Cannabis Canada magazine at the time. They sent me. I was doing some writing for those guys, and they asked me to judge the cup and do
Uh-huh.
an article about it. So I did an article a long time ago for High Times Cup there. Um, it was fun. I got the bike and cruised around. I really took it serious, and I spent a fortune of my own money. I went and bought every sample listed in the cup,
Oh
and
wow.
by the end of it, I was. It's kind of like, this is really just a ploy to get tourists buying a bunch of weed in Amsterdam in the slow season,
Did you
because
write it?
there's a lot of the weed's the same weed, even just in the different shops with different names. And
Yep.
you're just like, at home, I wouldn't be buying all this grams of weed from all these places because, again, I grew my own and it was better than most of what I'd have anyway. So I thought, I better come back with entries the next year. But
Oh
that's
yeah.
a whole other story. but the but yeah, plus that first morning of the first cup I went to, it was down at the PAX Party
Yep.
House down south there,
I remember.
and there was no coffee shops really close by, so there was like 1,000 Americans showing up looking for their passes, and then they're going, "Well, where's the
Where's
weed?"
the weed?
And they're like, "There's no coffee shops really close to here," and I'm like, next year I'm bringing weed and selling it here."
Oh yeah.
And then they said, "Okay, well you can't sell weed." So what we did at the booth is, it was a few years later, and I came from Switzerland with a bunch, and then we had the tables, and they say, you can't sell weed at the tables. You can only share it and give it away samples and stuff. I'm like, okay. And I'd brought like 12 kilos or something. So I said, we're selling little glass one hitters that we had like a glass blower friend make that he said, okay, these cost us, I don't know, $3 each or whatever. So we're going to sell these for 12 euros, but
Uh,
it comes with a free gram. So I remember Steve Hager like, fuck you guys, because we were just there. So it's like, we're not selling the weed, man. We're just selling these little glass pipes, and they're
yeah, but
giving the weed
back in
away.
those times, it was still the relaxed era. Especially Amsterdam
Semi.
police,
No,
they
I
couldn't be bothered.
remember Tony from Sagarmatha he had his display plant that he was taken in or out of a van or a car out front, and the police station's right beside the
Yeah, that's
PAX.
true.
And the cop came by and saw him with the plant, and he was giving him shit, and they were arguing about this plant. And I stood there and just watched for a while because I'm like, I'm kind of curious how this plays out,
Yeah,
you know? So I would just watch, and I don't even remember how it played. I think eventually the cop just threw up his hands and went away, like, because he's like, at the Cannabis Cup, there's just 2,000 people smoking weed right in there. There's plants all over the place. You're going to hassle me because I got one on the sidewalk. And,
yep.
it was this big thing. But man, yeah, so many stories from trips to Holland I can remember,
The
and
the, the high
friends
times
I
cup
made
was.
over the time. Look at this greenhouse shirt was
Oh
from
yeah,
back then. Look at that.
nice.
Lives of the plant.
Yep.
So, Ariane and I go way back, and we had lots of fun together. He's a controversial characters in some ways for
Hmm.
people, but he's always treated me very well. We've had a great time together, and he used to come with his family and stay with us in Switzerland when the girls were young, and
Uh-huh.
now they're adults. And he's got a son I haven't met. Um, but yeah, I remember him and Brenda coming with the girls when they were young, and they would collect wine around Ticino to take back. But yeah, we had a lot of fun, and we had some got together in Thailand more recently. That's the last time I'd seen him. But yeah, it's he's got lots of tales to tell too. That guy,
Absolutely.
he's he's been through the ringer on it, and
I
even
just
before he had shops.
I just did a profile on him for the Soft Secrets, the European newspapers that come
Okay,
out in a lot of countries. So that was, like you say, it's controversial a bit. And to me, it was important to. I spent some extra time on the profile. Let's say it like that, because
okay,
I
good.
didn't want I did not want to make like a hallelujah story, and I did not want to make a put down story. But I really like the reader to like it's the show not tell thing. You know,
Sure, sure.
if they read the article, they can make up their own minds if they think the main thing about him is that he is very arrogant, or that the main thing about him is that he really loves cannabis and is a real good marketeer. You know.
Yeah, he doesn't stop, man. That guy's a hardworking dude. Either
Yep.
way you look at it, he's a hardworking dude.
Absolutely.
Because, and but yeah, he cracks me up. I always get a kick out of hanging with Arian.
Hmm.
Audion. But yeah, it's had too many stories. But yeah, I was getting up this morning to join our thing, and I was like, oh, I've got a huge amount of pot t-shirts, and lots of them I never wear. And I'm thinking, do I have any Dutch ones? And I thought, I have an old greenhouse shirt from back then. So I put that
For
on
the Dutch
purpose today
special.
since it was our Dutch episode.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, that was very conscientious.
Yep.
But yeah, it's always fun to see what he's up to, and he's he definitely, you know, knows how to grandstand on it. But, he's been really a hardcore activist in lots of ways by being active.
Mhm.
And there was one point in the time we've known each other that we'd had a bit of a falling out, and that was when I heard that he was working with a company in Canada, which he maybe didn't realize, but I was educating him about, because that company was on the news lobbying for arrests of the legacy people and stuff. So in the that
Okay.
were had the coffee shop, or not coffee shops, what do they call them, dispensaries here, but
Hmm.
pot shops, the pot shops that were unlicensed, that were open before.
Yeah.
But even if you've jumped through the hoops and paid all the fees to be legal, I think you've still got to hand it to the people that came before, and at least be a little gracious
Of
in
course.
expecting some transition time there. But to be in the news going, the police got to go and arrest those people and shut them down, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, dude, you're partnering with those people. Like, I was like, seriously, do you realize what a bad look that is? But so we had a little falling out over that. He's like, oh, you're just jealous. I'm like, I promise I'm not.
Yeah.
Anyway, later he found out that they weren't nice people, and he realized it was a mistake to deal with them. And so he called me up and said, I should have fucking listened to you, mate.
That's very
So
great.
we got to we rekindled our friendship after
Uh,
that. So it's, but yeah, I have lots of respect for him. I think he's pulled out, he's really done a lot to put the place on the map, let's say. And
totally.
he called me up to one time when he did, shortly after he'd launched the Strain Hunters series, and I think he had the Colombian one. Maybe, I don't know, it probably wasn't the first one, but I was in the wine industry at the time as a vintner, and I
Hmm.
wasn't really paying attention to the cannabis scene. So he sent me a message and said, hey, watch this watch this show we did. So I watched this Strain Hunters Columbia, and I said, "Oh, that's a great show, man. That looks like a lot of fun. I like what you're doing." And he says, where else should I go? Like, where would you go for somewhere exotic to check out the
Yeah.
local scene? And at the moment he asked me, I was smoking Congolese grown in Vancouver, but straight Congo, a nice narrow leaf plant, really a pretty distinctive plant. So I was smoking that.
Go there.
Would check out the Congo, you know.
Yeah.
People ignore the equatorial weed more, you know,
Oh
but
yeah.
there's so many amazing flavors. It's not that those equatorial plants aren't high quality necessarily, it's that they don't have any post harvest preservation, you know? So the minute they cut it, it starts to decompose in the humidity and heat. So you see that in the tropics all the time. You see the live plants and you're like, wow, these smell incredible. But you hang it up for 2 days in a barn at, 100% humidity and 38 degrees. In 2 days, it's all brown,
Yep.
it doesn't smell like that live plant did, you know? So I just thought, there's so much to be explored in equatorial. And I feel like the heart of Africa is kind of ignored. So I had suggested he go to Congo for better or worse. And then we felt bad later when it didn't work out well for Franco, unfortunately, So that was very sad because he was such a passionate, nice guy. I remember the first time I met him in Holland, they had a farm, call it the pig farm, and they had a setup there, and Ariane drove me out, and we went in, and Franco was there looking after the place, and you could see his enthusiasm when he'd run up to Ariane with, check this one, and he was just so animated.
Absolutely.
And I really enjoyed seeing how into it he was. Like, he was just the eager beaver,
Yep.
and, younger at the time. And then later we got together in Vancouver for a dinner and a quick puff, but and not a proper sesh, but like a little quick puff on the sidewalk anyway. But yeah, it's he, Arion's brought a lot of attention to the Dutch coffee shop scene and kept his brand rolling abroad and doing all kinds of fun stuff. And yeah, I think he deserves a lot of the respect he's got, and as some people take issue with collecting seeds in Africa, for example. I've heard people saying, "Oh, well, Arion said, nothing comes back to them." Yeah, he's just being honest. All the other seed companies are the same, So do you think Afghanistan gets kickbacks for every Northern Lights sold? Like, come on, everything came from somewhere.
Yep.
So he was just honest about, yeah, we're not saying that we're building schools here with the proceeds from their seeds. And I know as well as those seeds may never amount to anything. Like, lots of stuff you try out doesn't end up making the cut for whatever reason or getting used. So to say he's there exploiting the locals is a bit harsh, I think. But on the other hand, it's awfully weird to show up with police to collect your genetics from farmers too. So there's some bad optics, I think, on that collection job. But either way, that's outside of Holland, so it's not really applicable to this episode. But you feel me, I understand where people are coming from sometimes if they're being critical, but lots of people are more critical than they need to be, and blow shit out of proportion constantly. But yeah, it's nice, I'm always happy to see what's going on in Holland because at one point it was really the leading light in the world for tolerance. And I remember there's a statue there. I think there's a tolerance is the hallmark of a free society.
It's
Something to that
outside
effect.
the station in Hilversum, which is like our media town where all the TV companies are, etc. And there they have the tolerance policy, like the tolerance statue, and it's actually two hands clasped together like this, which I think, I don't know if that would symbolize tolerance most for me. But
Or
funny
chillum.
that you mention it. Yeah, funny that you mention it because so this must be 10 years ago when the tolerance policy was like 40 years old, and we thought, why not try to get some attention, with the VOC for legalization. So we sent out a press release that we were going to get like a cannabis, what you call it, a wreath, the thing that you put on
A wreath, a wreath.
soldiers, a wreath, yeah, like that,
Yeah.
but made out of cannabis, of course, and that we were going to put it on at the tolerance thing there in Hilversum to commemorate that we have 40 years of cannabis policy now in the Netherlands. And whereas before, when we really tried hard to make an event with nice speakers and go to a lot of effort and try to get journalists in to cover this story, they did not show up. But this was a really easy thing because I had the plans. My wife made the wreath and just to have a little speech right there, and so many. Then we got a lot of media attention because maybe the journalists clicked on this thing that there is actually a statue for tolerance in the Netherlands, which most people wouldn't know. But that was quite interesting. Though we also had like some Fox type TV guy who was making a report there, and his first question was, "Shouldn't you be at work?" That was his first question to us as activists. But yeah, that's funny. The tolerance statue.
No, it's good. I think to me, that's something that always stood out about Holland because when I started going there, that was really one of the most tolerant places on earth. And it had the red light district and then the hash bars and whatnot. So you think, yeah, they understand that tolerance is so important to a free society. Like it's really is the hallmark of it. So
Hmm.
it, you just think, well, so many places need to take a cue from the Dutch because they've, civilized. They're one of the few civilized nations out there. As far as if you were a pothead in the 80s or 90s, you thought where else? There's just nowhere else they're really tolerant about until you get, like, say, off the beaten path in any production country,
Yeah.
then obviously they've got their own ways there too. But in, let's say, major cities, no,
Uh-huh.
it's one thing to be up in, hand rubbing hash in Milana or something. Okay, well, you're in Milana, but it's different, if you're in Katama than if you're in Tangiers,
Yeah.
right? They're
Yeah.
not the same place. So
Absolutely. And of course,
anyway, I think the world's come a long way since Holland really led the charge and Holland cracked the door open, I think, for the rest of the world. And even if it backslid, it still showed a better way and it opened it up. I remember Ariane saying, yeah, like, what are we supposed to do? Buy it from Santa Claus? Like he's
yeah.
telling the judge this because as a coffee shop owner, you can have a certain amount, wasn't that much. I forget, 500 grams or
500 grams.
something as a coffee shop owner. But you had to, that's not going to last you that long if you're a busy shop. So you're constantly in a restocking mode, and
To me, this
it's
has
just
always
not.
been almost like a surrealist theater going on, especially in Amsterdam, but in all the cities that have coffee shops. That there's this whole infrastructure of guys with sporting bags who go from the stash place to the coffee shop to make sure that there's enough stock in the coffee shop. And pretty much everybody knows this. The police know it, everybody. But we still let keep going on with this total nonsensical charade. Why can't they have more? And by now, that's also funny because, like you have in Canada, that the province can make some tweaks to the federal policy and be more strict. We basically have the same thing with the coffee shops as well. So if a city decides to have no coffee shops at all, they can do it, and there's no way that you can open up a coffee shop in these cities. So you see that the policy is also brought forward by local authorities. Like one of the main promoters behind the experiment is the mayor of Breda in the south of the Netherlands. And I recently interviewed him, and he's now almost a bit like me. He's like a veteran in explaining why regulation is so much better for everybody than leaving it to the mafia. And I've had some politicians before that I knew in my life that usually what they do, if they take this subject up to start with, they only will be added for a short time. And some of these politicians have told me personally, I will do this now for a year. I will try to get some movement on this, on regulation. But if it doesn't work, I'm going to stop, because otherwise I will be Johnny Weed for the rest of my career as a politician. I don't want to do that. Whereas this guy from Breda, he's been at it now 15 years. So that, to me, that's interesting to see how in the Netherlands it's really the national politicians who are the negative factor in all this. On the ground level, where they know the coffee shops and they know what role they play in the society, they want to regulate for sure. They want this backdoor nonsense to go. They want also their people to be able to grow some plants. So but it's still a struggle. That's of course strange. I would when I found out that Canada was going to legalize. Of course, we were going here in the Netherlands. Yeah, now the Netherlands can follow, because this I was told also by some high civil servants, that there's almost a trauma from these days when France used to criticize us so much about cannabis and coffee shops, that the country, the powers that be, they never ever want to be the country that's way up front in the first line. They don't mind following. If Spain legalizes, if Germany legalizes, then we can follow. But but you can see that the following, it's not going that well, because it's so slow process with the experiment. The experiment really officially only started in April last year, 2025. It will last for 4 years, and then they can even extend it with 1.5 years more. So if you are counting, this means that up until 2030, we will still have most of the coffee shops getting it from, like Ion said, falling out of the sky or whatever. And that's really crazy that this takes so long. But yeah, it's obviously this is the way that we have to go to get to legalization.
You're making me think of something I'm sure you've heard me talk about online, but I think about there's a middle way between black market and mafia and state regulated,
Mhm.
and that's depenalized.
Yeah.
Because the mafia guys can't really compete against the quality guys, but the quality guys aren't allowed to do it, and they're not real hardcore criminals,
Yeah.
so they don't feel like incentivized to do it. Whereas the mafia, they don't care as much about quality, but they've got the balls to do it, even though it's illegal. So it's kind of, you can have unregulated and legal, to me, is the ultimate way. And I call that depenalized, because decriminalized can still have restrictions and
Oh yeah.
fines. And if you don't pay the fines, you're still going to jail. Whereas legalized, it can mean, okay, only 10 companies can grow and the tax is going to be 250% and blah, blah. So legalized, you got to be careful with that too. Be careful what you wish for.
Oh yeah.
Whereas depenalize is just like, look, just treat it like a normal plant. Like echinacea affects your endocannabinoid system. It goes to the same receptors. If you wanted to grow extra echinacea and sell it in the farmer's market, it's nobody's business. And if people want to buy it off you, that's up to them. It's got to be just that easy. To me, that's really the true north.
Yep. Yep.
We can adjust the sails for the headwinds, but really, true north is just, it's a plant, and leave our gardens alone. And if,
Yep.
people like my homemade salsa, that's great. If they get botulism because it came from an unregulated facility, well, they're probably not going to be good customers for very long.
Yep.
So, everybody's got an interest in not poisoning their customers unless it's a captive market. And
Yep.
even in Canada, where it's legal and tested and regulated, and they've still had, you know, drama with scandals about companies using prohibited systemic fungicides or miticides and then hiding the containers. And there's been a number of these episodes, and there is higher levels of, stuff that on the black market, apparently, that has levels of these prohibited substances as well. But like you said, if it's the guy that's smoking his own that's able to sell some extra, he's not going to spray his weed with that, so people can come to trust certain outlets and they can come to trust certain brands without them being regulated, because they can say, well, this guy's stuff is always good, so I always smoke his brand. And I know he smokes it too, and I have zero concern about it. And when it's been tested, it tests clean. I've seen, but I don't care if it's tested or not. Or you can buy it from Rasta Johnny at the end of his driveway, just farm gate sales. That doesn't bother me at all. Like, I think, and if you want boy in the bubble pharma grade, and because you've got compromised immune system or whatever, by all means you should be able to find pharma grade product. But there's a difference between pharma grade and food grade for a reason.
Indeed. Yeah.
Most people don't need pharma grade. Most people are good with food grade. So I think there's nothing wrong with having both. I don't think it all needs to be pharma grade, and I think it's kind of can suck the life out of it a little bit, the je ne sais quoi that makes it special. And even a lot of people realize eventually, or don't, but that weed grown in the full sun and in the earth can have a little different character than stuff growing in rock wool and salt. And so if the regs say, oh, everything's got to be, sterile beyond, like in Canada, they had, for microbial contamination, the cutoff was for the tolerance limit is 50,000 CFUs. That's colony forming units. Oh, your voice is gone. Can't hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm back.
Oh, you're back now. Yeah. So if they played it and they find 50,000 colony units or more, then it's failed microbial, and then it often gets irradiated. There's dead microbes instead of live ones. But if you ask Health Canada, what's the permitted CFUs on cigars? No answer. They have no answer because it doesn't exist. So these double standards, that it's just bullshit. There's every time I've seen legalizations, obviously the first time I grew legally was when I moved to Switzerland in 99, and they had never made plants illegal. They made the use of plants illegal. So you couldn't have a hash bar because that's a hash bar, but you could have any amount of plants because Swiss botanic research is huge, and we're not going to start outlawing plants, because then once we start with one, where do we stop? And that's just crazy. So we just made the use of plants potentially illegal. But if you wanted to breed cannabis because you like the way it smells, that was a perfectly legitimate reason to
Like
grow
Austria, a bit.
as many hectares as you want, right? So it was a non-issue, and there was no license. It was just like if I went there and wanted to breed tomatoes, I didn't have to apply for a license to breed tomatoes, and I didn't have to for cannabis. So I remember thinking at the time, in 10 years, the whole world will be like this. And I was dreaming. But, it was so perfect because it was just normalized, and you could go into mainstream supermarkets in May, and out front with all the Dusty Millers and Peppers and all the trays of plants ready to go, they had hemp plants and they had cannabis plants, and they had colored plant tags that said like White Widow finishes mid-October, plant in full sun and well drained, and there was other one with Compolti, grows like up to 12 meters tall, and they had a picture of this giant Compolti hemp plant. So I mean, they were just selling them side by side like they were nothing, right?
You got to look into the future.
Yeah, but it was a non-issue, and it wasn't like people walked by and went, "Oh wow, look at all those pot plants." People are just like in their own world to walk by. I didn't see anybody buy them. Well, I only stood there for a minute or two, but I was on a consulting gig at the time with Ed Rosenthal, with these three brothers that had 4 farms around Stettin, and they had the main farm where we started consulting was at their mothers and clones. So they had a big glass house. I think it was roughly a hectare of glass of mothers. And I do have a picture from back then. I'll have to find and post sometime that Ed took. But I think they were doing 500,000 clones a week,
Wow.
or every 2 weeks. But I think it was 1 million a month, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was so many clones. They had like 200 refugees there from Kosovo and Serbia, and they had to fire all the men because the men would fight and they could only get the women to not fight, and they would work across the table for each other. Sometimes there would be tables where there's most of them trimming, and some days most of them would be making cuts, but then they had full greenhouse equipment because it was a working poinsettia greenhouse before. So there was like transplanting equipment and all the, you know, pick up all the clones out of a tray and then slide over and spread out and drop it into the pots coming by in a conveyor belt. So it was kind of like industrial horticulture is the most I'd ever seen at that point. That was in May of 99, I think. And I was like, they have machines transplanting the clones into pots and another machine that was filling the pots with soil as all on conveyor belts and stuff. And I was like, that's intense, like I was blown away. And I'm like, they were selling so many cuttings because it was just a non-issue. Like you could sell the cuttings.
Yeah.
I think in some cantons, there's 36 cantons, and some of them were more in support of cannabis than others. So particularly the French ones weren't too into it. So there was a lot of pushback from them. But in most of the country, it seemed, well, maybe it wasn't most of the country, but most of the country where I went, at least the parts I went, there was endless supply of cuttings just being sold on right in front of the shops. Like it was
in Austria, they
just
have a similar
normal.
situation where the clones are really the plants in Austria, they are legal. And it's like you say, the use for like narcotic ends, then it gets illegal. And I thought for a long while that until the plant starts flowering, then they were illegal. From the moment they flower, but it's not like that. Even like you say, if you keep them for the smell, it's really the moment that you dry it and you smoke it or whatever, then there's a problem.
One of my old
also the clone factories that are even in Vienna, and how many of these, like they go to Hungary and they go all over Europe, because where else could you buy clones legal like that? Maybe in Switzerland and then in Austria.
Well, I have a friend, Konz, he's a German fellow that used to come and do some trimming for me in Switzerland. And he took back all my cuts to Germany and got sweet tooth and shishkaberry and grapefruit kind of all over Germany in the early 2000s. And he's got a clone factory called Clone Lab in Vienna, and of course exports a lot. And he said the one time he did have the police come in and he had a whole room flowering and he thought they were going to be on his ass, but he was making seeds in that room. So once they were able, when he went to the bud and said, look, these can't be smoked, they're full of seeds, and showed them, and they were like, oh, okay. So they gave him a, pat on the back, and that was his visit. So he's been okay since. But he's like, yeah, it's okay to grow cuttings, it's okay to grow seeds, but if you got 10 kilos of flower that's seedless, he's like, they're gonna make problems for you. Yeah. So, but anyways, I'm doing some genetics licensing through him. He's lost all those old ones he'd had, but he'd made some nice shishkaberry crosses and grapefruit crosses, and he was working out of Holland for a while. It's called Horda Lab.
Oh yeah.
And then now, so Horda Lab, and then he's got Clone Lab set up in Vienna. So he's going to be supplying my clones pretty soon. So I'm getting him restocked with the old classic Spice of Life stuff. So he'll be selling those soon. And he's going to make those infertile ones with me as well for Verosense. So we'll be able to put some of those out. We'll have to get you some cuts to try once they're released. But they're fun. Man. So what else do you want to, anything else you want to touch on regarding cannabis in Holland or anything else?
To leave on an optimist note, is that really after years and years of steadily going down and a lot of growers moving to Spain, even companies moving to Spain from the Netherlands, from the moment it was clear that this experiment was really happening and that there were really good people working on it on the licensed producer side, we are really past the low point. And as a country and as the cannabis scene here, things are finally starting to look up. So that would be my message also
Good.
to your listeners, that yeah, indeed, we lost the ball. So many countries took us over. It's true, but that might be another interesting thing I like to note, that okay, so we've been taken over, and even Germany is a better law in some respects than we have, but to be able to go to a shop, buy the cannabis, and the only thing you have to do is prove your age, sit down and smoke the weed in the same establishment, is still unique in the world. They're trying to
Yeah.
get it with consumption lounges in California, etc., but they're not there
Yeah.
yet.
In
It's
Canada
bring your
too.
own
Yeah.
or whatever shit. So that I
Yeah.
always say sometimes, even to journalists or people who are pessimist about it, don't think that we are totally dead as a cannabis culture, as a
No,
country,
no.
because this is still unique in the world. And then the frustrating thing is that since Corona and since the tobacco law came in the Netherlands, quite a few coffee shops, they have opted themselves, without being forced to by some government, to close down their consumption rooms, so that they are now just dispensaries where you can only buy and not smoke while you're there in the place. And this to me is very stupid, even from a business sense, because for politicians, imagine if all the coffee shops would do this, and there was no coffee shop where you can actually hang around, talk to people about cannabis, learn how to use it, all this shit, what's really important. It'd be much more easier for the politicians to say, we can just as well have it sold at some other place and not a coffee shop
The
anymore. And,
pharmacy. Yeah.
you're out of
And
the
then
game.
people smoking it in the park everywhere instead,
Yeah,
So you either let them smoke it in the lounges,
yeah,
or they're going to smoke it everywhere.
that's the
So I don't
thing.
really mind if they do both, frankly, but
Yeah,
yeah, it's crazy. But it's became a leapfrog. So I think we all want to see it progress, and we all want to see it progress everywhere. So it's not like, oh, Germany overtook us.
uh,
You're not in competition so much, and it's more just like, hey, way to go, guys! Like, we got to pick up
very
our
true.
socks here.
I will
And
never forget in 2024 when there was every year they have the Handparade, like the hand parade in Berlin. And I know the people that organize it, good friends. And I knew if I go in that year, it will be the first year that everybody can smoke weed on the street, and there's not a police officer that can do
that's
anything
awesome.
about it. And to
That's
have that
awesome.
feeling and walk all the way in the center of Berlin with all these people, the weather was great. Those are such great moments where you can think back on them, and get the positivity from that if you have the memory that, yeah, they
Sure.
pulled it off. They really pulled it off. And of course, the 50 grams should be higher, three plants, not
Yeah,
enough, blah,
yeah,
blah,
yeah.
blah. But hey, this is a
You
real,
got to
real,
start somewhere.
a real result.
That's super to see. You know what? I just want to bring something up I just thought of was when I think about Dutch cannabis activism and Germany, because Germany was one of their major blockers back then, and like France, Germany was holding them back. And I remember the very first High Times magazine I ever saw that a friend brought back from Florida, because they were even illegal to sell in Canada at the
Wow.
time. And there was an article about a Dutch protest for cannabis, and the activists were putting seeds in balloons and filling the balloons with helium on a day that the wind was blowing to Germany, and they released all these balloons with seeds to blow over Germany. And I just thought that was so beautiful.
Spread the seed.
And yeah, and so yeah, who knows what they were? I don't know what the seeds were, but I remember it for a couple of reasons, because it was innovative activism, I thought, and it made the news and got them some exposure. But maybe a few plants popped up somewhere, who knows? But either way, I was just impressed that it was creative activism, and
Which is always the best way, of course, and
yeah,
to keep it positive and also know who you are talking to. If you are lobbying the politicians, I learned so much about lobbying and about the whole sender receiver thing, that if you want to get through to these politicians that you are trying to convince, you really have to put yourself in their place. What is the kind of picture that they want to see in a brochure? What's the kind of language, the kind of words that they are used to and that they respond to in a good way? And this I've learned a lot, but it's what is frustrating in a way with politicians. I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but here members of parliament, for instance, the time that they are in parliament has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter. So normally, if you invest like in a member of parliament and maybe have a few appointments or at least have a mail conversation, whatever, then they sort of understand why home grow is important, etc., etc. But then they have another job. You start over again
mm,
with that political party,
mm,
But
mm, mm.
keeps me off the street, I guess.
So with VOC Netherlands, where can people find out more about that?
The website is in Dutch. If you are still on Twitter or on X, I don't like to call it
Yeah.
X, but then it's at VOC Nederland. So that's VOCNEDERLAND. And then I think there's also the website there. And that would be the best entry. And otherwise, it's the website is VOC and then a normal dash. And also Nederland, written in the Dutch way, .org is the
Okay,
website.
super. We'll add it in the description so people can find it if they want. And I
Wonderful.
think it's a good idea to follow you guys and keep up with what you're doing. You're putting on a homegrown cup too?
Not
A
exactly.
homegrown?
The friends of mine,
Oh,
they organize the homegrown cup, but what we do organize is the thing we call the golden watering can, and this is a photo competition for home growers. So every
okay,
year
okay.
people can send the pictures in, and then we give one golden watering can for the best photo and one for the best plant. Because obviously, if the plant is really no good, but you make a real interesting image of it, then it's still a good photo. And if you
Sure.
have a super nice plant, but you are not that good a photographer, but anyone can see, wow, what a great plant. That's why we have the two prizes. And actually, just last Wednesday, we had the little ceremony in Maastricht, in one of the very few grow shops that still exist. Let's not get into that too much, but we used to have a lot of grow shops where you can buy this stuff to grow wheat. The 90% of them are gone. Everybody buys their stuff via the internet. But this one, Organic Earth in Maastricht, is still very old school. Been at it since the 90s, and so it's a fantastic partner to have, and also to have the to award the prizes there. So that was a good little event.
Oh, good to know. Good to know. Yeah, it looked like fun. I saw your pictures. Well, super, man. I really appreciate you. Oh, excuse me. I really appreciate you coming out and joining me for this inaugural interview episode, and
It was a lot of fun, Steve.
I I think it was great. It was great to finally talk to you face to face, even if virtually, because I think it's got to be, at least 8 years we've known each other
Yeah.
online, and we never even had a call. So this was really awesome to have our first call in public, as it were. But it was, as I figure your stories are going to be interesting for people to give them more background on the history of how things got moving in Holland and to where they are today. And also of the new stuff you've tried from the local producers.
Yep.
Do you have any favorites? Do you have any outstanding producers that you think you'd recommend for people that are going to try the herb from those new shops?
Yep. I could say that there are only 2 out of 10 grow on soil. All the rest grow on rock wool. And one of these that grow on soil is the biggest one, and they grow in a big greenhouse. And so that's really mid quality. It's very cheap, so I know it's very popular. But the other one, they grow indoor on soil, and they're called aardachtig. So just look for a brand name with a whole lot of A's, letter A's, and they are really good legacy people. I know a lot of these people that work there, and they are really putting in all the effort to really, really get a very nice product. So that's one that I would certainly recommend. And then the other one, which is indoor on Rockwool, but they also been winning some awards. They are called Hollandse Hoogtes. So just look for a brand name that has Holland in the name. There's only one. And so these I actually bought some in Maastricht when I was there on Wednesday. They have very, very good quality flower, I must say. I didn't smoke much of what they put out that was bad. So these two, I would say, are my favorite producers up till now. But legacy brands is the one that I haven't tried yet because I'm not. They either are just on the market or are not yet on the market. And this will be interesting to see what kind of genetics that they are using. But it gets ever more interesting because now they are starting to introduce blunts for instance. We never have that in the coffee shop that you can buy a blunt like that. They have introduced like dog walkers, and I love that term. And this is what to me was it's like it's a very big company that does these dog walkers, but the fact that they state in their press release about the new products that this is a good tobacco-free option for the consumers in the Netherlands, this make my heart jump because
Oh,
apart
good.
from all the other activism goals, I would really love to get more people off the tobacco and smoke pure weed. And as you
Smart.
know, in the Netherlands, 90% or even more still do only with tobacco, even the weed.
Yeah,
So
I just think if you add tobacco to the weed, it's only because the weed's so shitty on its own,
yeah,
and if the weed is really excellent on its own, adding tobacco to it's a crime.
yeah,
It's like you don't get, a really high-end old scotch and then add Coca-Cola to it.
yep.
It's just you it's obscene.
But for
So
Dutch
the
consumers, this is still a novelty thing. Although I do have the idea that we're finally sort of the amount of people that smokes pure is growing. That I would say,
yeah,
but it's
I
not.
think that's part of it is a lot of people told me that they add tobacco to it because the weed's more expensive and it helps them stretch it out a little bit. But it's no excuse. It's not an
Nah,
excuse. But
they
if
don't
you grow your
understand.
own, if you grow your own, you're never concerned about the price. So the tobacco is more expensive than the weed. And if the
That's
weed,
true. But
and
even and there's even scientific backing for this. If you have the craving to roll another joint, that is because of the nicotine that you put in your joint. If you just
right,
smoke it pure, you might
you
feel
feel
like having
satisfied
another joint.
longer.
But the real craving, like, I need another one, I need another one. That's all out of the window after a few weeks. But now I'm preaching to the converted, of course, in Canada because you
Yeah,
guys,
yeah,
you already smoke without tobacco.
yeah. With flour, no, I'm kind of archaic in that I'm one of the few left that appreciates even having some hash and
Yeah,
tobacco, like just because I'm
old
an old
school.
guy. Like young people would never.
Uh-huh.
Whereas, and I don't even do it at home typically. Only if a friend comes over that
Yeah,
happens to smoke cigarettes, and then I'll be like, okay, that's God telling me I get a hash spliff today. But the
but
if
it's
I'm
good
on
that you
holidays,
can.
I make an exception.
It's good that you can keep it up and not, fall back into
Yeah, if I
the
just don't
tobacco right away.
possess it, if I
Yeah,
if I went and tried to buy some tobacco and keep it there, and I've grown my own tobacco in the past, and I actually was pleasantly surprised with that. When I was packing like hookah bowls with it, and then throwing a chunk of hash on it, and I quite enjoyed that too. And and that was nice, clean tobacco
yeah,
because
of
it was
course.
never sprayed with
All
anything.
the
It was
additives.
grown organically and stuff. So I don't mind doing that, but I haven't had tobacco in quite a long time right now at all. So I just don't have that many people dropping by.
Yeah.
where I live, and even that, most of my friends don't. They've all quit smoking. You know,
Yeah.
we're all over 50 and starting to, have those thoughts that you're not going to live forever like you thought when you were 20.
Yep.
And you were indestructible. Now we're like, I think it's time to cut the tobacco out, right? So I'm definitely not a tobacco smoker, but if once or twice a year I treat
Uh-huh.
myself to a hash spliff, I get a real rush from it.
Of
It's
course.
a
And
it's
then
a totally
if you
different
can keep
lift.
it so low as like that, then it's no problem.
Yeah. Yeah, then it's fun, and it's
Yeah.
just a special occasion thing, but over as a rule, it's not a daily driver for me,
Yeah.
straight grass or dabs. Usually, I would say mostly today, this season especially,
Yeah.
since I was telling you earlier, I don't do combustion in the house, so I just dab or vape in the house, and then and edibles. So, and God bless them, but if I'm gonna burn a joint, I go outside. So in the winter, I spend a lot less time
Yeah.
outside, but still, I have a hot tub. So sometimes I'll like to roll up a nice cone and I go have my coffee with Frangelico in a big cone in the hot tub,
That
and
doesn't
then
sound too
it's
bad.
yeah, I'm not getting cold. I'm sitting there in the
Yeah.
hot water and blowing a joint outside. It's just so many ways to go, right?
Absolutely.
I'm a bit of an old timer in that I still appreciate just a plain bowl of hash. And if I'm cooking, whenever I'm in the kitchen cooking, I have the hood going and I have a little pipe and some hash stored right by there. So whenever I'm cooking and the hood's on, I'll take out a lighter and actually smoke some hash
Work up some
under that
appetite.
hood.
It's very
Yeah,
smart.
yes, it's nice to catch a little buzz while you're cooking. I do most of the cooking around the house, and I enjoy it, but it also I'm always puffing a little bowl or two of hash while I do it, and it keeps me from going outside anyway.
Yeah.
But man, I look forward to my next visit to Holland. I gotta make sure we
Come
get
down south.
together.
Come down south. And
Yeah,
if I'm in
we're
Canada, we'll
over
be
to
knocking on your door for sure.
yeah, my guest room awaits, man. I got a guest room here. You're welcome to stay and hang out. I'd love to have you. It's really a
Fantastic.
pleasure, man. Thanks a
Same
lot for
here.
your time today.
Okay. Have a nice day. Bye bye.
All right, brother. Have a great night. Bye.